Okay, welcome everybody to today's European Specialty Tea Association's webinar for tea professionals from all around the world to learn, connect, and collaborate. My name is Bernadine Tay, and today we have a very special focus on Kumaon Tea Project, which will showcase, the future of tea in India. Now, as you know, the landscape of tea production is constantly evolving. And through this project, we'll explore the shift from large government-run estates to more smaller farmer-owned operations. This transition will reflect a growing trend towards sustainable and high-quality tea production. You'll observe firsthand on how the Kumaon project's success was due to the synthesis of diverse skills and perspectives from a collaboration amongst the very best of tea industry professionals, something we all can learn and apply to our endeavors in tea. Now, additionally, we'll discuss the critical role of transparency in the supply chain and how these efforts aim to foster positive social, economic, and ecological impacts. Join us as we hear from these people directly involved in the project, how these elements can come together to shape a brighter, more sustainable future in tea. So, for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we'll hear from Raj, Alicia, and Nigel. So sit back, relax, and sip some tea. And if you have any questions, as always, please put them in the Q&A box. And Alicia, this time not myself, Alicia, will address them and pose these questions to Raj and Nigel. So, hi guys, welcome. Before we begin, Raj, who is the founder of Young Mountain Tea, I'll ask you this question first. What does specialty tea mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. It's so good to be here. Thank you, Bernadine, and everybody at the European Specialty Association for the chance to join you. You started with a hard question and a controversial one. And it's actually a question that I've talked about with Nigel because for the factory that we're going to be talking about today, we've installed two different production lines. One that is to make what we're calling specialty tea, and then one to make what we're calling orthodox tea. And so in differentiating the two, the way I have thought about it and understood it is specialty has to be special. And by that, we mean small batch. We mean generally a higher focus on quality, which is only possible when you're working with smaller volumes. Traditionally, maybe there's a whole leaf component, so not necessarily the particles or smaller pieces of the tea leaf, but the whole leaf that gets infused. And ideally single origin, so unblended, unflavored, which gives the chance to really highlight the region's terroir, the bush, and the tea maker's skills. So I think it's a complicated question that has a lot of dimensions to the answer, but certainly on the highest level, it's to focus on attention to quality at every step and an appreciation for the subtleties that really differentiate specialty from more traditional styles. Nigel, how did I do?
Oh,
Very good.
Thanks.
well said, and I think it sets the scene, for what you're about to share with us, which we're very, very excited to hear. But I won't let you off, Alicia, because I know you have lots to offer. Now, Alicia, you help makers around the world, producers around the world make tea, and you teach them different techniques. And I can't wait to hear what's your take on what specialty tea is.
Thank you so much, Bernadine, for putting me on the spot also. But yeah, I've also spent a while thinking about it, and it's very broad. And as Raj put it, the easiest way to say it is it's special. But thinking about it today, I think what makes it really like specialty tea versus others is that it's crafted with a consideration that the final product is more than just a commodity, that it's something that focuses on quality. It takes into consideration the whole every dynamic it takes to make tea. So you're considering the economic and like ecological aspects of this. So you're kind of growing it and processing with that in mind, trying to leave a positive impact, and also socially as well. You want this one product to like really kind of leave a mark in a positive way in the world. So I think anything that's crafted with that kind of global consideration in mind can be considered like specialty tea.
That's also very well said. Yes. I can't wait. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to share about the project. And I shall leave you, Alicia, with the floor. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Bernadine, for setting that up. That was fantastic. Yeah, so my name is Alicia Gentili, and I'm a specialty tea making consultant. As Bernadine said, I kind of go around the world helping small growers or even large growers either start or improve their specialty tea lines. So I was hired by Kumaon Tea to go there and kind of explore their leaf, what's out there for specialty tea, which was an amazing opportunity. And I met Raj about 9 years ago at World Tea Expo, or sorry, Northwest Tea Fest. And from the moment he told me what he was doing, it was just, that's why I want to be in tea. I think it incorporates everything that I care about in tea. And I'm so excited to be part of this project. So I'm really excited that Raj and Nigel have agreed to just kind of talk about it to everyone. I think hopefully everyone will find it as fascinating as I do. And Raj, I would love if you maybe wanted to introduce yourself and how you even got into tea, because with most people, it's not very linear. It kind of just happens to you, or you have a cup of tea that changes your life, and kind of you fit that pattern. So if you just want to talk about how you got into tea in the first place, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. And gosh, 9 years. Wow,
Yeah.
how time flies. Yeah, well, I got into tea really through an interest in exploring cultural connections. I'm of Indian descent, and I'm happy to have my mom here on the call today. And I was born and brought up in the US. And so I was very interested coming out of college in ways to work with rural communities in India. And I did a different project related to solar electricity. And that project just really introduced me to the unbelievable level of talent that exists in rural India, and the ingenuity, the true entrepreneurship of farmers, where sort of being creative is a necessity for survival. It was inspiring to me, and really made me ask myself, like, what if that potential had the chance to really flourish, and what would the world look like if hundreds of millions of people had access to opportunities that I had just been born into in the US? And so I started Young Mountain Tea in 2013 with a promise to farmers in this region of Kumaon, where we're putting up the factory today, that if they would grow tea, I'd start a company in the US to sell it. And the idea was to figure out, how do we unlock this potential? These are agricultural communities who are really accomplished at growing all manner of crops in really challenging conditions. And because there was a history of tea in this area, and because the soils were strong and good for it, it felt like there was potential. So from the beginning, Young Mountain has been organized around the idea of, how do you create livelihoods for farmers, and how can we use tea as a vehicle for change?
I love that. And as to kind of piggyback off of that, could you maybe explain a little bit of history of tea in that region? Because tea isn't new to there. It's been around for quite a while, and kind of what happened in that region to kind of get you to want to start growing tea more there.
Yeah, sure. And I've got a little video I can share that kind of helps to paint the picture of the story in the region, that we'll put in a second. But briefly, the British planted tea in Kumaon around the 1850s. So right around the same time that Robert Fortune was bringing tea saplings over from China and into India. They were also doing experimental plots in this region. And it's chronicled in Sarah Rose's book, For All the Tea in China, that the first ever Indian-grown tea to make its way to Europe came from right near this region in Kumaon. Not in Kumaon proper, but those are modern boundaries, and historically it's the same area. So from the beginning, tea took well to the soils in Kumaon, but it was so far away from the ports that they couldn't set up the supply lines to get the tea out of the mountains and onto the ocean. So in about the 1930s, 1940s, coming on 100 years after the first experimental plots were planted, the British began to pull out. And so for about 50, 60 years, there was only one family growing tea, and they're the Birkbeck family, and they're today our closest partners in Kumaon. And they worked with the government to relaunch a program that grows tea that has been running for about the last 20, 25 years. So right now, the government is pretty much the only active player in organizing farmers to grow tea and to process it. And what we're doing with this factory is creating an alternative to the government model. So I know that's a lot, but just super brief, the British planted it. It kind of disappeared for about 50, 60 years while just the Birkbecks were farming it. And then for the last 20 years, the Birkbecks have been working with the government to get to the point where we are at now, which is really hopefully a launching point for elevating the quality and the impact of what tea can do in the region.
Absolutely. And that's a super game-changing thing to kind of move the control over from the government, which kind of seems like it hasn't really kept up its end of helping farmers really even with their livelihoods or keeping up with the land. So transitioning from government to cooperative owned is it's pretty groundbreaking and a new thing, it's just a new idea for that region that hopefully is going to do really well. And before we go into that, I would love, Nigel, if you would want to introduce yourself, and you are a really big key player in this project and kind of what your role is in developing the Kumaon tea.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Well, I've been in tea for 43 years, so I've seen a lot of tea growing, and I've seen a lot of bad tea growing. When I started in tea, I was working with Unilever, and I worked on big plantations, huge plantations, 1,000 hectares, with 2,500 acres, with thousands of people, and the emphasis on quality is not so good. And as I've developed as a consultant, I've been able to be more picky about the work I do. And I met Raj about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, Raj, I think, at World Tea Expo. And Raj had a little table there. He couldn't afford a proper booth. And he just had a table with some tea on. And I went over and had a look at it, and it looked very good. It looked good. And but he didn't have any tasting cups. He had no tasting it. So I nibbled on it because, when a consultant hasn't got tasting cups, that's what you do. You crackle it in your ear and you nibble it in your teeth and you sniff it. And it was pretty good tea. And he told me about his project, or the project he wanted to do. So we talked about that, and it stuck in my mind as a good way of approaching tea growing, to bring out the importance of the people at the bottom of the pyramid, the producers. And as I said, I'd been working for the big companies, but more and more I was working for small companies, artisanal companies. So Raj and I kept in touch, and about 4 or 5 years ago, he started seriously to look for funding for the project, and I helped him, and from there, eventually, he signed me up as a technical consultant. So mainly a technical consultant in terms of identifying what machinery was needed and to help on factory design. Now, bear in mind that many tea factories in the world are not what you would say up to standard for in terms of food hygiene. It's a bit of an elephant in the room. People don't talk about it. But Raj is selling tea in the United States, and to do that, you have to be able to show a transparent line back to the origin of your tea, and that origin has to meet American food hygiene standards. So that was one of the challenges, is to create a factory which is acceptable to the American food agencies, and also is understandable by the people who are running the factory, because it's a bit of a culture clash. So we designed a factory which meets American standards, which means it meets European standards, which meets all the standards in the world. And then a second challenge came along, which I was very, very happy to take up, is the fact that the tea in the Kumaon, where it's grown, is a place called Champawat. The yield is very low. So as I have a lot of field background, I have worked on that for Raj for 12 months to see what we can do about increasing the yield, because the factory can only run if it's got enough green leaf. And at the moment, the yield is pretty low up there. And we've identified some of the causes of that, and we're putting remedial action into place. And as the factory takes off and it ramps up, then we're hoping and expecting that the yield will increase to match the capacity of the factory. So that, in a nutshell, Alicia, is how I got into it and where we are at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't help but love everything about the project. You're like, of course I want to help people. Of course I want to make better tea. Of course I want to improve soil quality. It's just, yeah, so you chose a good project. So before we go into more details, I think, of both sides of the project, both front end and back end, I would love to show, Raj has a really fantastic video with drone footage of the region, which is absolutely stunning. And someone did ask a question about where this region was, which is a good question. It's in the Himalayas on the Nepalese border, about 10 hours east of Delhi. Raj, maybe you can elaborate more on like where specifically that region is.
Yes, I can do that. And just before I do that, I just want to acknowledge one of Nigel's longstanding contributions to this project has been to remind us that while this project is in many ways driven by the heart, to make sure that we're using our heads and making sure that what we design and plan around is grounded in reality. And truly, I think a lot of stops along the way, having the experience to say, like, that might sound good or that might feel good, but the practical implications for that are X, Y, and Z, has been a really helpful form of advice and guidance throughout the project. So in all the realms that he's contributed, I want to make sure that that's something that we recognize and acknowledge and give credit to Nigel for. I pulled up, seeing that question about where we're talking about, I've got a map pulled up that shows it. Alicia, would you like, I could share my screen to do that, and then we can go to the video
That would be
after.
great. Yeah,
would that make sense?
Appreciate it.
All right. Yes. Are you seeing my screen now?
Sure am.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this is a map put together by Mitra, our creative director, who's also on this call. Hi, Mitra. And this shows tea producing regions of India and Nepal. This is South Asia, the subcontinent, which is actually still going up as India goes under Asia. The subduction is driving it up, and the Himalayas are caused by that tectonic collision that stretches across here. So Kumaon is right here. As Alicia was saying, it's right on the border with Nepal. This is Tibet to the northeast, and sort of central Himalayan stretch of the range. So the Himalaya begins here and kind of reaches up, and this is where it is. Yes, I think I'm gonna actually have to do a separate screen share to get the video up. But just as I do, I want to say I'm very excited to be able to share this video. This is fresh off the press as of
I have not even seen this full video yet, so I'm very excited about it.
This is our first attempt to try to capture the full scope of the project, and you all are the very first folks to see it. So I'm going to share my screen again. Everything's queued up. I'm going to go. Is it full screen for you all? I can't actually tell.
Kind of.
All right, well, I'll hit play, and Alicia, maybe just flag if there's any issues with this playback.
Sure will.
We are setting up a tea processing facility. It will be one of the most modern factories in northern India. Start to finish, right to the cup. This is owned by the small farmers.
This project's origin really starts with the British, who first planted tea here in the 1850s. When they did that, they seeded what could be a gold mine for specialty tea, in that these soils are perfect for growing high-quality, high-elevation teas. However, without the market access for those teas to create income, the opportunity was never fully realized.
If you go to the recent past, All tea estates, they are based on a large scale model, and it's mostly government owned, corporate owned entities that are running those tea gardens.
Half of the Darjeeling tea estates are for sale right now. Assam is going underwater with climate change leading to sea level rise, and there's riots and strikes that regularly shut down production. So if this, the world's most popular drink after water, is going to have a future in our lives, we need to create a new system, and that's what this project is about. Women are fundamentally the backbone of rural culture in India. They are the ones who do the majority of the actual farming work. And the most lucrative part of the tea trade happens inside of a processing facility. But farmers don't traditionally have the upfront capital or the technical expertise to set up their own. So by us working with USAID, Frontier Co-op, and Acumen, what we're doing is shifting ownership into the hands of the farmers who already do the hardest parts of the work, but just aren't right now able to participate in the rewards of that work.
Prior to this project, farmers in this community didn't have an ownership stake. And so the culmination of all these efforts will benefit roughly 500 farmers who, over time, will collectively own the entire processing facility. It's an opportunity to reinvest in the well-being of their communities.
तो महिलाओं का कहना है कि जो भी इनकम हमारी चाय पत्ती से इनकम हो रही है, उससे हम बच्चों के पढ़ाई पे खर्चा करेंगे और अच्छे स्कूलों में भेजेंगे और वो आगे को बच्चा क्या करना चाहता है उस पे खर्चा करेंगे.
This project has an element of risk. But we also know that if we don't take that risk, this tea, this drink that we all love so much won't have a viable future. So I'd encourage anybody who wants to get involved in helping us to lower that risk, not just for us, but also for the farmers who are involved. And join us, drink Kumaon tea.
All right, that's it. Hopefully give a good overview of the people and the places involved. So Alicia, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That was really beautiful and emotional, and especially having been there and feeling it and working with those farmers. It's just, it's such a beautiful story. And I guess because we're talking about the farmers now, like, how do they feel about this project?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good and complicated question because as we're discussing, so what has existed to date has been a government run program. The government is leasing the land from local farmers and then paying them to work on their own land. So from the farmers' perspective, for the last 20 years, they've had a very nice, consistent, stable income that sort of minimizes their risk in that they're going to get paid independently of how much yield comes off of their land, like how much tea leaf they actually harvest was not a factor in how much they earned. However, that government program was never really designed for being economically viable, and unfortunately is now sort of reaching its limits. And so the government is winding it down and graduating farmers out of the program. So when we got involved, it was during a stage when the farmers were undergoing a lot of stress and feeling like what had been a stable livelihood for 20 years was now kind of disappearing, and they were going to be on their own to figure out what to do. So about 2.5 years ago, once we began to actually take steps on this whole project, we began a series of trainings organized by a local co-op. So another farmer group in a neighboring region came over and started running trainings with the farmers to help them understand what this change meant for them and to acknowledge the risks, which are truly real, but then also to acknowledge the opportunity that comes with stepping into being an independent farmer. And because of their ownership stake in our factory, the possibility that their income would go up over time. But explaining profit as something that's going to come in 3 years' time and get distributed among farmers to somebody who is quite literally often having to deal with their finances on a month-to-month basis, if not weekly or daily. It's been a journey where the idea of transitioning from a wage earner as part of the government program to an independent small business owner is one that we have had to be very mindful about making. And it's not us making the transition. These farmers are going to go through this no matter what. But our role can be to not only help smooth that transition, but also to point them towards a more empowered and collectively organized approach. And so we've seen a lot of really exciting progress with those trainings. Most recently, the farmers went and visited the co-op's campus and understood what self-help savings groups look like, and then came back and organized their own. They've independently created a vision statement for their collective ownership, and that is to raise their income. But what was exciting was that they recognized that raising their income is directly connected to raising their yield. So the issue that Nigel alluded to, how the yield in this region is very low, is one that was embraced by the farmers as something that there's room for growth in. And so a lot of times what we say internally is that this project moves at the speed of trust, which means that it doesn't always just race forward in a linear wave, because we're talking about working with people from another culture, from another background than certainly my own, but even within the community, there's lots of layers of social and caste status. So being inclusive across all of that and representing all those views is kind of hard to do quickly, but it's one of transition where there is an element of risk, as we said in that video, but there's also an element of optimism, especially seeing when we were there a month ago, with the farmers, and we danced, as you saw in that video, and they sang songs. One of the most touching moments was learning that they had written a song about what tea means for their community that they sing at the beginning of every meeting. When we see moments like that and get to drink chai with them and just feel the energy of that excitement about what could come, it's really why we do the work. But we're still at the very beginning of this. We're kind of at the end of chapter 0 of getting this up and running. And in the next month, as production begins to become actually kicking into gear, I think it'll all begin to feel a lot more real. But I think for the farmers, it's sort of like, when you buy a ticket for a flight and it doesn't feel real till you're in the airplane, it's sort of a similar moment for them. They're through security, but not yet on the plane.
Right. And it's great that you're taking that approach. Like you said, you kind of need to, especially if what they've been doing, they feel a little bit maybe betrayed by what they were promised and not got. Like, you can't just kind of go in there and start this whole new thing and expect them to like kind of be on board. To kind of go back to the tea. So where was the tea being sold that the farmers were making? Or currently what they're picking?
And can I actually just add one thing to what you said, Alicia, because you touched on something that's really important to me personally and to our work more generally, which is we're very aware as outsiders to this community, we have to be very thoughtful about the way we get involved, so it doesn't become a form of neocolonialism of some outside force coming in and saying, this is what's best for you, this is what you should do. And so that's why that they independently came to the realization that increasing yield is how they increase income was such an exciting moment for us to say, like, okay, we're growing into this problem together. We're not sort of like saying, like, here's your problem, here's how to solve it. Although transparently, that's what they wanted, because that's what they were familiar with the government program. However, the goal isn't just to create income, it's to create empowered and dignified livelihoods. And we believe that takes a little bit of tapping into their internal capacity and helping to grow it. So just to say that, I want to call out Earthcraft Co-op, who has been our partner on the ground and been running these trainings and working really the most closely with the farmers of anybody in this project. And recognizing that for something to be locally led does require a different approach that's not connected to business, it's not connected to tea, but for us it is fundamental. It's kind of the soul of this project. So you're asking, where was the tea sold previously?
Like you're picking it now, where is it going?
Yeah, so this government program, the idea was we'll grow tea, we'll cover the farmers' risks for the first 7 years when it's kind of getting up to productivity, like when the tea bushes are getting to a point where they can be regularly harvested. And their hope, the government's hope in the early 2000s, was that private companies would come and set up independent factories to buy the leaf off of the farmers. One company sort of tried to do it, but they came into disagreement with the government and they left pretty early. So the government got kind of forced into setting up factories because, as we know, like, the harvest of a tea is super fragile and doesn't have any commercial value except to a factory. So until it's processed inside a factory into a finished good, it's actually not really worth very much. And so the government set up these factories, but that's not really their forte. And so the qualities of tea that they made, while coming from really healthy tea bushes, or not really healthy, they can always be healthier, but healthy tea bushes, was good. It wasn't done with the same level of attention to detail as, coming back to specialty tea. It wasn't really in the mindset of specialty tea. And it wasn't intended to be, because what they're doing, about 90% of the tea was going through the auction system, just sent to India, where it would get kind of blended in with other lots and then sold off. Or the 10% that was remaining was getting just sold locally as kind of a tourist thing. When Young Mountain started to import tea, I think our first lot was in 2015, and scaled that up over time. We take about a quarter of what the region produces last year, or 2 years ago rather. And so that has been a significant purchase for them, but we're still a small business that really is going to be in the next couple of years to see if that's our challenge, is to grow Young Mountain as a business so that we can make sure that we're buying all the tea that they have. But yeah, the auction system and domestic retail was history, and recently we've gotten involved. But we're quite excited about the opportunity to help spread the word of Kumaon tea through conversations like this, and to have more people get interested in drinking Kumaon teas.
Nice. And it is exciting because, like you said, specialty tea coming from that region is going to be a whole new thing. So I think it's going to be really niche and exciting, and just exploring what kinds of great flavors we can expect out of that region. And especially thanks to Young Mountain Tea, you're bringing it to a wider audience. So it's really cool. Nigel, when you were there, you also spoke with the farmers. Do you have a kind of similar view of what the farmers' expectations are, or how they feel it? And to like double onto that, what do you think are the biggest challenges that they're going to face?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the farmers and their attitude, really, they are in a transition phase, because, as I've said, they've been paid on a daily rate, so it didn't really matter how much tea they plucked, or when they plucked it. They were getting paid anyway. They were getting paid for plucking and for looking after the bushes and fertilizing the bushes. But now the government is moving away from supervising, and it's moving away from paying a daily wage. And some of the farmers have seen the light and have come over to the Kumaon project. And they are working as a traditional small farmer works. He's being paid per kilogram of tea that he produces. And if he produces good tea, good green leaf, he'd be paid more than if he's producing poor green leaf. In fact, on this project, if he's producing poor green leaf, we won't be buying it at all. So the emphasis now is on quality, and the emphasis is on quantity, which it hasn't been before. So it's a real transition, a change of way of working for the farmers. And the farmers we saw, Alicia, are the ones who have seen the light, and they realize that the government model hasn't worked for them. And they've seen that there is a possibility that, particularly through ownership of their own factory, that they can actually create a product right from the bush, looking after the bush, right the way through to marketing it. So it is a big change for them. And in terms of challenges and technical challenges, there have been some, and of course there's still a few to change, a few to sort out. But the first challenge, of course, is actually getting to the place. It's so remote. It's getting machinery. We make machinery in Kolkata, which is the center of the tea machinery industry in India. It's 1,400 kilometers from Kolkata to the factory. 1,400 kilometers. It takes 2 or 3 days to get a truck from Kolkata. At the moment, the roads are cut off because of floods and landslides. So it's remote. And of course, that remoteness is the reason why it fell into this it fell out of production after the British set it up. That remoteness adds cost. The transport adds cost. But that transport changes the quality too if it's not well packed. Up there, there's very small scale compared with Assam, for instance, and that small scale adds cost. And there's low yield, and we'll come to that in a minute. The low yield also adds cost. So the only way for the farmer under those conditions is to sell at a higher selling price to cover the extra costs. And that higher selling price is predicated on the tea being specialty tea, which sells at perhaps 10 times, even 20 times the price of auction tea. So that produces a better margin, which covers some of those costs of being remote and being small scale and having low yield. So come back to the main challenge up there. The main challenge when I came into the project, the main challenge was getting the machinery, deciding on the machinery, getting the factory designed, getting the factory built. But it very soon became apparent that the challenge is in the low yields. And if I tell you that the yield is a fifth of the yield in Darjeeling, you might understand how that is, how important that is. It's a fifth of the yield of Darjeeling. And Darjeeling is a third of the yield in Assam. And Assam yield is a quarter of what you would get in Africa. So the yield in Kumaon is really, really low.
Now, Nigel, one of the things, I'm sorry, I just want to hop in to say one of the things that you shared to me that was helpful is like when you're starting this low, there's only one direction to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what you're about to say.
And I must say, as a consultant, I also like projects like that because the only way is up. And if you do, well, unless you really make a mess of it, the only thing you can do will improve things. So yeah, it's a good place to start from if you know what is the reason for the low yield. So we spent a 12-month project looking at why the yield is so low. And principally, the yield is so low because the well-known guidelines on tea planting, not when the British planted it, because then it was all trial and error back in the 1850s. But now India has the premier tea research institute in the world, Cochlai. It has some, it has 112 years of scientific input into what is the best way to grow tea in India. And they have good guidelines. They have good agricultural practice. They know a thing or two about growing tea. Very few of those guidelines were taken into account when the tea was planted, replanted 20 years ago. And that is the main reason that the yield is so low. So having spent 12 months working out what the problem is and how we can sort it out, we're now hand in hand with the factory ramping up. We will be putting some simple field practices into place, fading tea, which is needed in some areas, and mulching the tea, which is absolutely standard practice in the tea world, to mulch your tea, and is not and has never been done on this tea in Champawat, in Kumaon. So that's the main challenge. There are a few others, of course. The turgid bureaucracy of India, which again goes back to the Raj, the British Raj. It goes back to then when to keep people employed, they put layer upon layer of bureaucracy into place. Unfortunately, the Indians took it over, believing that that was the way it should be done. And they are learning, and in many Indian industries, they have learned that that is not the way. And a lot of Indians go over to America and do MBAs and come back and run very, very successful businesses. But unfortunately, the tea industry hasn't had the benefit of that, and the Indian civil service hasn't had the benefit of it. So that is a big challenge, and it's taken perhaps 12 months longer to build the factory than we had originally planned. Problems with getting money into the country and problems with spending money in the country. And of course, as a consultant, a visitor, getting there, it's a 10-hour drive out of the airport. Now, normally, tea never grows near airports. Why should it? It normally takes 3 or 4 hours, but 10 hours is something special. And that's 10 hours. That's 8 hours along the 80% of the travel is on the plane, which is good roads, toll roads passed. But the last 75 kilometers takes 20% of the journey. So that's we're going at about 35 kilometers an hour, which is roughly about average of 20 miles an hour on the last part, which is hairpin after hairpin after hairpin, going up into the Himalayas. So
and
that's
then we run into Nigel, and then we run into the roadblocks, a landslide which wipes out the road entirely.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, Nigel and I, we waited 3 hours on one trip just because when a landslide happens, the traffic stops until it's clear. And if it's okay, I do have a short video that Desmond sent me 2 days ago of what the road conditions are like right now. I didn't mean to interrupt, Nigel, but I would love to share it before we transition too far away from the remoteness of the area, because this is a central challenge to everything we do. Yeah, I'll just share it real quick and then give it back. So this is what happens every single year because of monsoons. You can see this was a road that is no more.
And it's not really like you can just like go around either. Like that's yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite spectacular to see the rocks as you're waiting to go through. The huge boulders coming down, and then the police sort of take a look up and think there's a 30-second window and you can get 3 or 4 vehicles past.
But yeah, Nigel, thanks for like alluding to all that. And it's a really good representation of, I think, what we were all talking about the other day, of this project really being a collaborative effort with everyone stretched across like every part of the industry that's really involved in this. And everyone, you really have to care, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of challenge, even just working with stuff from the ground up, like these soil conditions, like that you're talking about, that's going to take years to see the effects of this, and it's really amazing and heartwarming. And I think it's really going to pay off to see everyone kind of working synergistically together on this.
Yeah. And even at our level, we're working in the project is working in 3 different continents. It's US based, but it's happening in India. I'm in Ireland. You've been for a year in Holland. So it's it's an unusual project.
Yeah. And Raj, I just want to ask you kind of one more question before we open it up to the floor. There's some good stuff that people have been asking, but what would you say are the overall goals of this project? Or like the final, like what's the future? Like what would you ideally see?
Yeah, the goal would be to establish a model that is an alternative to the state model in India, and one that centers on the farmer and their lands. So the goal is a sustainable future for the Indian tea industry, which we believe is really connected to farmer ownership of the value chain. Beyond that, a goal would be to ensure that the governance and the way this project moves forward is really in tune with what the locals want. 90% of the farmers we work with are women, and maybe in a second we can get to the question in the chat about what engaging women in leadership roles looks like. This is much less quantitative, much more kind of subjective and qualitative, but the idea of somebody being able to realize their own potential is really an exciting one that doesn't just stay within tea, it doesn't stay within agriculture, it just relates to how we interact with each other as people. And so that's another goal, is to demonstrate that there are ways that international teams like the one we have on this call and all the other people involved can come together to work with other communities on other sides of the world to create something that is going to work. So I think those are the 2, I think. Something for tea and something for all of us.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that this is the way that tea around the world is tending to go. From the plantation, the big plantation growing the tea, that model is outdated and has been replaced by small farmers. And 65% of all the tea in the world is now grown by small farmers. The idea of big estates is in decline, particularly in India. The Indian Tea Board is all in favor of small farmers coming into the industry with a say. In Africa too, this is happening. And the largest smallholder group, cooperative in the world, is the Kenya Tea Development Agency, which has 600,000 small farmers as members, and I think 53 factories, and mega factories at that. So it's an idea whose time has come, and of course there's a lot of unfairness still in that as it is being put into place, and this project is the fairest project I've come across.
Yeah, I don't see how it can get more fair with the ideas like behind it that Raj is like, it's from the heart, and like someone that really understands and cares. So yeah, I think that that's where the future specialty tea is going. And also real quick, before I open it up to questions, there's going to be a trip in October with Young Mountain Tea and Nigel Educating to Kumaon region. If like anyone wants information about that, to let us know. As someone that's been on a trip with the 2 of them, it's invaluable, but you'll actually get to see the magical tea forest that you saw in the video in person, which is a really special experience, and get to see the new factory actually all set up with the equipment in it ready to go. But yeah, just wanted to say that really quick. But what you guys were just talking about is actually a good segue. Raj, the question that someone asked about women, what are some of the challenges, issues that you have to address to prepare women to take leadership, ownership positions?
The first challenge is to prepare the men. These are traditionally very patriarchal communities where women from a very early age are risen and sort of shaped to be not in decision-making positions. And this is one of, we can't take, this is our partner Earthcraft's, this is their forte, is kind of working on this. And the way they describe it is that they treat the village as an entire ecosystem and don't just focus on one particular demographic. They don't just focus on women, because for this to be a holistic long-term solution, men have to have a role in it. And so even getting involved with having the women participate in the trainings, initially, they was just presenting this idea to the village as a whole, and the men were the decision makers. So this is an interesting thing. Like, we couldn't lead with, we're here to empower the women in your village to take leadership positions, because that unfortunately is often viewed, power is viewed as a zero-sum game, where if women are going to gain power, then men are going to lose it. So figuring out ways to navigate the internal politics of the village and get the men on board to see that this is not going to come at the expense of your stability. This is going to actually increase it, because with women being more involved, yeah, everybody benefits. But that's a journey for sure. The other thing is that after we kind of completed that, initially the women couldn't attend the trainings without men's permission. That was a big thing, that they could start attending these trainings without men being around to kind of like make sure that whatever's being discussed wasn't like counter to the local culture. But then later, what I mentioned, that this visit that the farmer group made to the co-op's campus, that was a huge deal, because again, the men were involved. So we see like these steps towards more independence. It has been interesting, though, as a result of both the government program and the local culture, that the women themselves are still much more comfortable deferring to men for making big decisions. And one thing I've talked about with my mother, who is a very strong Indian woman who teaches women negotiation workshops, is how this work isn't just for this generation, it could be for the next. And those seeds have to be planted now. So to your point about this being long-term work, we don't view this as something that we're going to like say like, okay, check the box, empowerment has occurred, we're done. It's a journey and a process, and one that really proceeds first with the village as a whole, then with a particular group, and then maybe with their kids. And then we're looking at hiring 2 of the women to become more involved and start to help spread the word of the trainings. From basically, one of the things we're looking at is we have 50 farmers that have signed up for the first year of production. There's 500 in the village as a whole. So how do we go from training 50 farmers around these concepts to training 500? And the idea is the women that are part of the first group will become the people who spread this word and the kind of the work to the other villages. And so that's been the focus more recently, has been how do you begin to coach the more aspirational of the farmers to becoming local leaders. So it's a process, and one that is a joy and also a really complicated one.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the fact that you've clearly already considered this and, like you said, planted the seed, like that's like the best thing you can, like that's what you can do right now. So it's really exciting stuff. Next question is, has climate change started to affect the quality and efficiency of the tea you produce? Do you have any long-term measures or alternative solutions planned regarding this issue? I don't know if Nigel or Raj, which one of you would like to address climate issues?
Alicia, I feel like you can address this, having firsthand experience with what that did to this year.
Yeah, so from my experience, I've only worked there one time during 1 month of 1 year. I don't really have anything to compare it to, but it was pretty clear that drought is affecting the area dramatically. The monsoons are starting later in the season, so the tea, kind of when I was there in June, it was just not flushing at all. And from kind of picking the small amount of leaf I could and making as much as specialty tea as I could, the quality and quantity weren't there. So I've suggested going forward that just not even producing specialty tea during that month before the monsoon. So sticking to just first flush and post monsoons for the high quality teas, which I'm not sure is something making orthodox teas like for auction is something anyone would ever consider to do, like change your mode of production based off of like what's happening in the ground. But that was my experience of it. And it does, I mean, from what I've heard and studied and experienced, that yeah, climate change is real everywhere. And yeah, by doing things like kind of altering which types of tea you produce at which seasons are gonna have to be in place for sure. I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
I guess I just add that to your point about producing different types of tea depending on the conditions, this was very much part of the design. And Nigel, please, you should speak to this because it was largely Nigel's brainchild of we're not just locked into making only specialty tea. We have the ability to make the traditional orthodox tea that can be sold as brokens or through auctions if need be, because the goal is to buy the leaf from the farmers to create income. And that means that we have to be flexible with what makes the most sense for what the quality of leaf is, as well as what the market wants.
Yeah, so we have made the factory as flexible as possible in terms of processing. So we can make black tea, green tea, white tea, oolong tea, when the conditions are right, when the leaf is right. So no one will be making oolong tea from April through to November. It will be when the leaf is right. And when the leaf is right for white tea, you won't use it for black tea. When the leaf is very hard, then you can use some of the large machinery and pulverize it a little bit. Whereas some of the other machinery we have, Chinese green tea machinery, will be used when the leaf is suitable for green tea. So yeah, flexibility is the key. In terms of climate change, however, the big thing is the declining amount of rainfall. And at the moment, the rainfall, the average rainfall, so of course, 50% of the time you're below the average. And so, but the average rainfall is not enough for growing tea well. And very soon, the farmers or the tea board or investors, anyone who is interested in maintaining the tea in that area is going to have to think very carefully about irrigation. Around the world, people are starting to irrigate tea, not necessarily because it's necessary all the time, but just because you know that with climate volatility and changes is as much about the volatility as opposed to the gradual increase in temperature and the gradual decrease in rainfall. But sometimes you've got too much, sometimes you've got not enough. So there's got to be thought put into rain harvesting, to create reservoirs and to pump water up from the reservoirs onto the tea. Otherwise, whole areas of tea around the world are going to go out of production. No, I mean, not this year, not next year. By 2050, though, it will certainly be looking bad, for instance, in Kenya, where the east of the rift will be down by at least 60, 70, even 80% because of the increase in or the decrease in rain and the increase in temperature. Yeah. And people in there are talking about, and this is a possibility in the Himalayas, are going up because as we go up, the weather becomes cooler. As the weather becomes cooler, then the rainfall doesn't evaporate so much, and the rainfall tends to be heavier. But certainly in Kenya, if you go up the mountain, which is what they're doing, you know, if you're here on the mountain, you've got, say, 1,000 acres, but as you go up the mountain, you get less and less land to grow tea on until at the very top you've got 1 square meter. So going up is good in theory, but you soon run out of land, which means that you have to be much more efficient with the land that you have. And it's better to have a higher yield on less land than have a lot of low yielding land. So this is something that has to be taken into account. But first we have to get the yield up by using traditional ways.
Yeah, so it's certainly something that everyone in agriculture has to like plan for and adapt to. And this project's definitely done a number at trying to do what we can do now with the resources that we have to, improve water retention and soil conditions to kind of combat these things. Bernadine, do we have time for one more question, or are we done?
Sure, Alisa, go ahead.
All right. Okay, last question. What cultivars are you using to raise up the production level? Similar to those used in Darjeeling, how close to the Kangra tea growing region are you in Kumaon?
Yeah, the elite clonals, as they're called, came from Darjeeling, that have largely what you saw in the nursery. Alicia, there's almost 1 million tea saplings growing that are either cuttings, so like direct clones of mother bushes that came from Darjeelings, or been grown by seed. Those are primarily AV2 and T78, which the government bought from the Makaibari nursery in the early 2000s. In one of our project partners' garden, Desmond, there's also original tea bushes planted from Chinese seed. So those are getting pretty old as tea bushes, and that's part of the yield issue, but the quality is. So yeah, it's primarily AV2 and T78 with one garden that also has some of these older China bushes as well.
But remember, bushes which were developed for Darjeeling 30 years ago would have a lifetime of at least 80 years. And if conditions didn't change, they'd be fine. But they were put in 20 years ago. They were developed in the 60s, 70s. They were put in 20 years ago. And now they're not necessarily as good as they were when they were planted.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a big problem with tea. It's a long-term crop, but with climate change moving so fast, you either have to replant with bushes or clones which are more suited to the changing conditions, or you have to accept that the quality and the yield will go down, or may well go down. So a replanting program is always something which you have to look at. If you're looking in the midterm and the long term, which in a project you must be doing, you must be thinking about having some replanting going on with modern clones.
Thank you, Nigel. And I just want to flag, this is a perfect example of what I was saying about the heart and the head conversation. I'm gushing about elite clonals and the quality of the 106-year-old bushes. And straight to the way that we have to make sure we're thinking about replanting programs.
You need both.
Correct.
That's how we all survive, both parts.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I think we are getting to the end. I want to say thank you guys so much. I feel like we could chat about this for like 4 more hours, days, like just keep going. But I thought that was a really good summary of what we're doing, and hopefully it gives people a really good idea of like these stellar, amazing tea projects that exist out there that are really trying to make a positive impact socially and ecologically. So thank you, Raj and Nigel, for chatting me about this, and for Bernadine for, setting this all up, and the European Specialty Tea Association for having us.
Oh, it is absolutely our pleasure. It's so nice to see individuals collaborate, and the beauty that comes out of it. But so, no, thank you so much for sharing. But before I tell everybody what to expect for the next webinar, would you like to tell people where they can get, if they're interested in Kumaon teas or Young Mountain teas, would you like to maybe give them a little a steer in the chat whilst I tell
Sure.
them?
Thanks
Sure.
for the chance to give a plug. Appreciate it, Bernadine.
Not at all. Not at all. No, this is where we share and collaborate as well. So that's wonderful. But thank you everybody, for your contribution to help people learn new things. I just wanted to say in continuation of this as well, guys, you have to join next month's webinar as well in August, because on the 14th, we will start, by the way, 2 hours earlier. So it's 7 BST, but we'll start at 5 BST because we will be delivering the webinar together with the Ceylon Artisanal Tea Association on the subject of artisanal tea movement in Sri Lanka. The goal of the Ceylon Artisanal Tea Association, or CATA, is to promote the production and sale of handcrafted teas in Sri Lanka. And by doing so, they hope to also increase the variety of amazing Ceylon teas available to tea lovers around the world, and to increase incomes, again, of smallholders, smallhold farmers and workers, where they grow tea, Sri Lanka's most famous tea. So please do join us for this. And also, of course, if you're not a member yet, guys, please do consider joining us, because we are not-for-profit organization and we aim to raise the tea standards everywhere, and we can only do this with your help. We offer education programs, share ideas, and support innovation projects and collaboration. And you can find out more about this on our website. We have different kinds of membership. So please do check out at specialtyteaeurope.com. But for now, guys, thank you everyone for sharing, and to all of you who have taken the time to join this webinar. We really, really appreciate all the support, and we hope to also see you next month on the 14th at 5 p.m. BST. So please do join us. But yes, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Well done. And I'm sure everyone appreciated that. So we so look forward to more information about how your project goes. But for now, I have to say thank you, close the webinar so that everyone can go rest, and you can go rest as well.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining, and have a good night wherever you are. Bye.